Okay, this is day 95 of making little videos that describe a day or thought in the life of schizophrenic Dominic. I don't believe I am diseased or crazy, but I believe I experienced schizophrenia probably for my whole life, and it took a turn in a negative way around Occupy Los Angeles in 2011. And okay, so I have written a book on medium.com. It describes unveiling the schizophrenic tradition is the title. It's for free. I post it there. Maybe I'll publish in the future. So we'll see what happens with that. Uh, and in day 17 and day 45 of these videos, I describe 3-minute intro and 45 about why I make these videos. And 17 describes why I call myself a schizophrenic rather than targeted individual. And I was going to get into a few topics. I describe things that are day-sane thoughts in the life to express some amount of sanity amidst the world going crazy and turning things around, saying I was crazy. And I describe potentially synchronicity things that regard synchronicity and uh, feedback that I get from the government or public or the universe, even. And so, okay, so I describe in Noah Yuval Harari's book, he describes something called emotional algorithms. And he described in there how a lot of times people think that we ascribe human like qualities to animals and stuff, and oftentimes these are actually mammal like qualities because mammals have huge emotional algorithms to themselves or whatever. And I thought that was interesting, the idea of an algorithm that you would make calculations based on your emotional get up. And I was just thinking, I was reading in the Lincoln book, uh, one of his, I think his nieces or something, was, she was afraid of Lincoln because he was this tall, gangly guy and he had this big coat, whatever. And she, she, she thought he was going to be like Jack and the Beanstalk character. He was going to be a giant that was going to eat her or something. And then he put her at ease. So he made that judgment looking at his face. So it's like an algorithm. Like just even when I was just thinking like that's true because it's like when we are attracted to somebody, we'll make all kinds of emotional judgments about their emotional character based on their facial qualities or whatever, and so you make these little calculations kind of quickly about like somebody or something, and then there's the active play that takes place where it's like Lincoln then he said something like oh, there's the little sister or whatever, and it put her at ease, and she liked the guy after that. And it's like it's very funny as like the way that we have these emotional cues that we it's our own algorithm that we have to just determine is like is this a safe situation or what's going on with this person or whatever. So I thought that was kind of interesting. All right, in our my Olajuwon book, it discusses the development of the beginning of basketball in Africa. And I guess in the 1930s and 40s, Egypt placed highly in medaled games or whatever because basketball games because Arab countries were in the northern Africa area were more likely to playing basketball because of their proximity to Europe. And Europe, basketball had already taken off or whatever. And so that was kind of interesting to me. And anyways, it talks about going further how Nigeria was a little bit behind uh, those countries, and at one point they had a few hundred kids in their basketball program. In the book, it's discussing like like missionaries or were instrumental in bringing basketball to the African continent, and to me, it reminded me of like the idea of like I think I was recalled. Actually, it made me think of the image of this guy is a YouTuber or something, or he's like a TikToker or something. I don't know. And he goes around. He's like an Islamic guy, and he does these like moves on the basketball hoops, and he films them, and he has like kids jumping at the same time, like uh simultaneous to him and stuff. And or he'll do it in like a garage. I think he's a mechanic maybe or something, or I don't really know. I don't follow terribly close, but I follow a little bit. And it reminded me of like the sacred geometry because like the way these guys moving in the air, it's like a very artistic thing, and it reminds me of like the sacred geometry to sports and particularly in basketball. Like you just take a look at something like Jordan, and it made me think of like like Islamic or even like Christian religions. There's like a sacred geometry history to those religions with regards to like in the way that the churches are constructed and stuff like that. And so like the idea of sacred geometry goes all the way back to like I guess the Greeks or the Arab countries and histories and stuff. And so it made me think like there's like a sacredity to sports in some respects as far as like a geometry, and with regards to like the missionaries teaching basketball. It reminded me of like what some Steve Nash said the other day in uh the United States, I guess was it, or maybe it was in Canada or something. And he was saying like when he was a kid, he wanted to be black because all the best basketball players were black, all the best athletes were black or whatever, and so it reminded me of like there's like a something sacred about the sport of basketball, and even in that experience with like national, like a kid looks at another race of person and he's saying like I want to be that person, and I can recall experiencing that as a kid. I wanted to be black at one point in my youth because all the best basketball players were black, so I definitely related to the Steve Nash thing. And uh, even my friend was a Filipino. He was a good basketball player, and I wanted to be Filipino for a little bit. And it's just like it's like kind of funny. Is like now I grew up and I realized that there's oppression and stuff, and so I realized like you are what you are. You don't want to be something you're not or whatever. But I thought that was interesting. There's like a sacredity of like a sport where there was like a race, the history of racism, and it gets a little bit rectified through a sport and the acceleration of like Africans in basketball or something. And I don't know. I'm talking a little bit out of turn here, but look, I just I thought there was like something to like this sacred geometry, and it reminded me of like this sacred geometry of sports, and I was, I just thought of those things today, and as I was reading about you know the the basketball there in Nigeria and Africa and stuff, and how it was started on kind of humble beginnings, and now you got the BAL, and now you got the ball league in Africa, and it's a really good league and stuff. So the national that. All right, so okay, I'll keep moving on here. Becoming Earth. In my book called Becoming Earth, it describes how like people, uh, beings and creatures, living things are not just products of their environment, but they influence their environment and they affect change on the environment of Earth. And so not only are we of Earth and we are affected by the environment Earth puts out, we change the environment of Earth. And it was describing how like the rainforest itself creates its own rain. And there's a whole system in place in the rainforest where it creates its own rain clouds, its own rain systems and whatever. So it's like it's feeding itself, and so it's like it's very interesting. It's kind of like a new way of looking at biology or life on the universe or particularly on Earth or whatever, and the idea that we are not only are we from Earth, but we are of Earth, that we are part of Earth now. Like it's a symbiotic relationship between all the beings on Earth and the Earth itself, and so I think it's going to be an interesting book. I'm just reading that book. It's called Becoming Earth. In my other book, Matthew McConaughey's book, it describes how he picked up a book called The Salesman or something, and he was one day studying for a test, and he decided right then and there that he was going to become an actor or go into film school. He wanted to go into film school basically. And he called up his dad and he was telling his dad, it was like, I want to be in film. And his dad basically said, don't half ass it. And so I thought that was kind of interesting that like his dad did tell him not to do it. He probably knew that his son had that ability. And so it was kind of interesting that he said, don't half ass it or whatever. And I said the other day I was referring to myself. I said I didn't say I half-ass it, but I said I don't. Schizophrenia has a demotivating agent to it, and so I'm not. It's not a half-ass. Like when I try, when I do stuff, I try my best, but like I'm not excelling in things because it's just like it's a lot of verbal and mental abuse that you receive, and so you just don't want to put yourself through those things. And that reminds me of like when I had the mind control and things like that. They made me sprint every day on the treadmill and got me into chiseled physical condition and stuff. And it was nuts. And uh, it was done to such an effect that we're like I didn't want to exert myself because I had the voices harassing me and mentally torturing me in the middle of while I was like running or whatever. And I was just that feeling of not wanting to exert yourself while being abused is it's almost like a fear that you develop as a mind control subject or whatever. So I still have that or whatever. So I was struck by the not half-assing it aspect of Matthew McConaughey, and so okay. I think when you're into something that you want to do and that you love doing, it comes natural, and you don't have to worry about half-assing it or whatever. So yeah, synchronicity, and then you get into something like a film industry where and they're trying to perfect their art and stuff, so you get it caught up in that sequence or whatever. Okay, I was talking about synchronicity from the universe, and I open up the second or third page to Not So Misfit Odyssey by Uncle John, and it was discussing that it was taking place in the Amazon. It was the setting was the Amazon rainforest, and I thought that was really interesting because my setting in the book that I just picked up for my birthday on April 11th, right when I was getting this book from Uncle John, uh, it the setting in that book is the rainforest, and I just started off this talk here, talking on Becoming Earth about the rainforest. The Amazon has its own system to affect change on its environment or whatever. So, like the Amazon rainforest has its own system to produce rain for itself, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And so, yeah, uh, I got a couple other things to talk about today, which was David A. Hughes' Operation Gladio, Yom Kippur War, and oil prices and how it was a shock to our system and stuff, and it was all part of a shock doctrine kind of thing. But I'm going to talk about that in another, probably tomorrow. I ran out of time today, so thank you for listening to me today, and I'm feeling a lot better, and I'm still on a high from our Disney trip, and even though I got a low because of the flu, but I feel a lot better. So thank you. Goodbye.